Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Forbidden Dinner Table. I am Alex.
And I am Zach.
And we have another great discussion in store for you tonight. This episode's going to be a little bit of a continuation of the latest episode on protesting, but kind of through a different lens. It's almost going to be all sort of calling back to that episode and fluffing things out a little bit further, but we really want to take it through the eyes of what is government supposed to be doing, and if that's being fulfilled or not being fulfilled, and that's kind of how protesting plays in. But just looking through the eyes of, like, in a perfect world, what should government really be responsible for?
Yeah, I think both of us went and re-listened to the episode, the protesting episode, and felt like we started with one question and that took us into another realm. And then where we ended, we sort of were like, well, this is a cool spot. Let's actually just pick up and do a continuation of this spot that we ended in. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, and as I was going back through it, I was constantly finding things that I wanted to kind of add to, or maybe we should have spun out and taken that topic a little bit deeper. So I'm going to start with this. And that's still in the vein of protesting a little bit, but we talked about BLM, Black Lives Matter protesting, and we talked about having goals. A good protest should have goals. And as I was listening to it, I thought people could easily sort of look at us and go, you don't think that protest had a goal, which was maybe just less police brutality or police reform. But I think the point that we were making was that there were never really any clear lines or metrics. You even brought up saying that you saw written somewhere in Minneapolis, burn it all down. Like, that's not a goal. That doesn't count as a goal.
Yeah. I think, I mean, when we put it in sort of, when we talked about the Canadian protests, their quote unquote goal was a lot more concrete of like, we want the mandates lifted. Like, I think of them as a binary goal. You know when you're done. Like,
right.
That's the sort of piece
to
it.
So I didn't want to leave us open to where people go, how could you not have understood what those protests were for? We did, but the best point you just made of, we never knew when we were done. Like, okay, police reform, well, what does that mean? What sort of numbers do we need to see? Is it just taking money away? For some cities or municipalities, I think they created like another force or like a mental health force or something. Great. So are we done? Like, and I think that was maybe why that kind of didn't go as far as maybe it should have, really.
Yeah, I think what is a very difficult conversation that I bring up with some people is, and this can be in the context of BLM or it can just be in the context of like broader society and what it means to have, at least in the United States, over 300 million people living together, and there's going to be friction of like, this is again a very dangerous sort of question, but like, what is an acceptable amount of people to get shot by the police per year?
That's true. Yeah. And that's
because the desired is zero and we should work towards zero, but we can't.
That might be unrealistic.
There are going to be mishaps along the way just by the nature of people living in close quarters and the nature of humanity, for lack of a better term.
Sure.
And so that is a difficult conversation to have, and I can understand if someone reacts of like, why are you trying to get very do a quantification of like this thing that is very sensitive in human life, and like, I totally get that response.
Yeah.
But also, with acknowledgement of that, we're back now to the table of what is an acceptable amount of these mishaps.
Yeah, and it was interesting to see some cases where there was a big flare up and people didn't like it and all of that, but everyone just kind of watched the video and went, yeah, okay, that one makes sense. Like, next.
Yeah.
So there is clearly a line, and maybe people just needed to do a better job of talking about that, which is a hard conversation, but that would have given us a quantifiable goal.
It's a very difficult conversation. It's very tough to get so many people to pull in one direction about a topic. I mean, I think what I would love to see out of the Black Lives Matter movement is a little bit more of like a cohesive leader, because I think, who I think the best person would be is Barack Obama, but I don't think he wants to sign up for the job, and I don't blame him for that either. But like, and maybe I'm looking with a little bit of rose-tinted glasses of just like the history, and it's easier to see when the dust settles. But like, the success of the civil rights movement, I think, is because you had so many people rallying around Martin Luther King Jr.
I think
and
that's true.
He was a voice that could get people to march in a direction that was like, this is what we want. And don't get me wrong, that's an oversimplification. There was Malcolm X. There were other leaders who had different, sometimes more like pro-violence sort of things. But when you look back at it, Martin Luther King Jr. rallied a bunch of people, and there was a collective front and ideas there. And I think it would be awesome if Black Lives Matter could get a leader that's super well spoken to help define some of those more binary goals, to say this is what we want.
When you're presenting someone you can go sort of negotiate with and say, well, okay, we know you guys want this, but what if we did that? Whereas with all these different chapters all over the country, like, you can't do that. I mean, you're stuck like city by city trying to figure out exactly it is what these particular people want done, which maybe is good too because it's a little bit more local. But then once you go on Twitter, it gets jumbled up because no one's taking into account the locality of all these different things.
There's power in a centralized voice. I mean, it's why I think the NRA has been successful historically on the guns right movement, because you have all of these people pulling in one direction. It's gotten fractured lately because their leader, there was problems with like embezzlement and then the internal fighting and things like that. And I would say that the NRA has lost some of its power because they've splintered internally. So just another example of like pulling together from a cohesive unit and having a unified voice.
I think that makes sense. Another thing that you had said in the last podcast, I haven't been able to shake this thought, and you said somewhere along the line that government is really only there to protect the rights of the people, which if you strip everything else away, that should be its primary function. Do you stand by that? Am I remembering that correctly?
I would stand by that. That's its primary function. I wouldn't say that that's the only thing government does, but I think it is one of the most important.
Got it.
One of the primary functions.
So I'm thinking about that through the Colin Kaepernick lens again, though. Of it gets a little bit interesting when you have. So again, this is like private company versus government, and at first it almost sounds like government should have stepped in and protected Colin Kaepernick, but I think there's a really important distinction, and that's that the government protects your rights almost like from itself or from its own encroachment. And so you can kind of almost put private in a different bucket because it's almost like the government is protecting you from itself, which I know was a fresh idea with historical context, because other countries you could go to jail or worse for speaking out or something like that. So it's interesting to reframe it and say that the government's protecting you from itself with those.
Can you expand on that? I'm not sure I fully understand what you mean by that.
Well, so if we're looking at like Colin Kaepernick again as an example, exercising freedom of speech.
Yeah.
The government is there to protect his right of freedom of speech. So let's just take the NFL and set them aside for a second. But the government's protecting Colin Kaepernick from the government, not from the NFL.
That's true. Is a cleaner example of like your rights are there for like you need to be duly processed if you're charged with a crime and like that sort of too, like those that to me is like a more front example of like there are these rights in place as you go through the system of being charged with something by the government.
Sure, yeah, I suppose. Which is also still the government protecting you from the government.
Yeah, I'm trying to almost come up with an even cleaner example.
Yeah, okay.
Point there.
Yeah. I was taking you through the thought train was if you just look at it as the government's there to protect people's rights. At first glance, the government should have like stepped up and told the NFL what he's doing is free speech and he's protecting, or the government's protecting Kaepernick. But that's not really how it's designed to work.
So can you take me through step 2 then of?
Well then, so step 2 becomes when you have private rules, what does the role of government become, and is there one outside of just like, well, this is not even a government issue?
Yes,
that's
I would
question.
say that there's individual rights that you have that by living underneath that government are protected, even when private organizations want to infringe on those rights. You can't, because people have them and they are protected within the government.
But then, so then why didn't the government tell the NFL everything Kaepernick's doing is okay and he has a right to do that.
Because you have a clash of two rights here. You have the right of a private organization able to create rules and run their own space, and you have the right of free speech.
Right. So we're circling back now where the government is saying, well, we're not doing anything. We're not telling him he can't. You are. So it really doesn't apply.
Okay. Now I'm clicking a little bit more of like, we haven't stepped in to say you can't do it.
Correct.
Somebody else has. But I guess put that in relief of like the rules that are in place that private organizations can't break, of like, I can't fire you based on the color of your skin.
It's weird. Yeah. Because a little weirder. So why all of a sudden is there a different line? That's kind of what I'm scratching at here.
Yeah. And I think the answer is we just as an organization or as a country sort of have come to accept that there are certain baseline things that are just completely protected and cannot be infringed upon, and other ones that are, I don't want to say up for debate, but like there's a set of rules there that there's usually a logic or reasoning to, and it really falls into social contracting around like why they sort of are there as well. A kind of silly example I could think of is like, I don't have the right to walk into a restaurant with no shoes and no shirt on.
Right. I think about that example a lot too. And you could say, well, it's free speech or whatever. But again, this isn't a government problem per se.
Well, okay, here's a great example though, because in our lifetime, it's changed. I used to be able to smoke in buildings. Now I can't smoke in buildings. I don't personally smoke. I say that like I'm mad. I think it's great, actually, that there's no smoke in buildings.
I just want to light one up on a plane, but I can't.
In a plane. It's
That's
funny
true.
too, actually. Yeah. If you look, even new planes manufactured today have cigarette, where you put out cigarettes in bathrooms, even though it's completely illegal to.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I've noticed they no longer even have the no smoking sign up above. It's like Wi-Fi and seatbelt.
My understanding is in the bathroom there still is that like ashtray, like where you discard of, and part of the reason I'll have to fact check myself on this is it's either, and it could be a combination of these two things. The list of requirements for still building a new plane, it's still in there as like you must have that as part of it. Okay. And the other thing which makes a little bit more sense is if for some reason somebody goes to the bathroom and smokes, you don't want them like throwing it in the trash can or putting it in the toilet or something like that. There's still, even if it's an illegal activity, they want to handle it if someone's doing that illegal activity.
That's true.
Makes sense.
That does make some sense.
Yeah. So, independence has contradictions. Freedom has these tugs and pulls back and forth of like, because by smoking on a plane, you are infringing on other people's rights to go fly and breathe clean air. So if I frame it that way and we go back to Colin Kaepernick, this is a weird way to say it, but like...
Yeah, maybe that wasn't the best example to start with, but
no. I think this is great because it's going to point out the weirdness of this, of like, by Colin Kaepernick protesting, is he infringing on people's right to consume entertainment without disruption? Like, weird. I don't like that example, or even
I don't like that being a right, but I see what you're saying.
You see what I'm trying to get to there?
I have a right to be entertained. Yeah, I see what you're getting at.
I have a right to see the Cowboys win every weekend.
I actually think you were going down a better road when you said it's almost like we have something happening culturally where we're starting to agree that firing someone on the basis of their gender, for example, is wrong. And the government is sort of going, I can step in if you'd like us to. And maybe at first we go, well, maybe you keep out. But eventually, culturally, we kind of go, you know what? Yeah, you come on in. Why don't you get involved here? And we've sort of just agreed to let them into that realm.
Because I think we've culturally come to terms that it is a right within the culture. Like another example I can give is access to birth control. This is a rather new one, too, under the Affordable Care Act, of like, especially as cultural norms have changed and the amount of premarital sex and sex outside of marriage and all of that has increased, we've come to culturally accept that as part of just the norm. And so then there's a new dynamic here of is it your individual right to make that choice? And if people are going to be making those choices, they should have the best healthy tools available. And because it's a cultural norm, now we're going to defend that norm as a right.
So that's almost the same thing where that is a recent one. So we've just recently sort of
trying
said,
to give another example.
Government, we actually want you here to defend that right, the right to access to birth control. We as a culture for a long time said, no, we don't want you involved. And now as a culture have kind of said, actually, if you could get involved here, that would be good.
Yeah, and it's important to remember, somebody pointed out to me, and I think about it a lot now, like government is a solidification of cultural norms on a 10 to 20 year lag.
That actually makes some sense.
Like it takes so long to solidify and work through. Like government rules is a snapshot of what people sort of want, and it's a behind the time because culture moves so much faster.
Yeah.
And so I think about that a lot sometimes when I just think about like the speed of government versus the speed of culture. And I mean, we can change. What were rights before have changed to different rights or lack of rights. Now we don't have.
I also have a note in here too that like protesting or activism, especially in the case of Colin Kaepernick in the NFL, could you just frame it as marketing? Like he's marketing for a cause, or really any form of protesting. This is still sort of in the free speech vein. So, for example, I can't put a Billabong sticker on the back of my helmet and run around on the field. The NFL is going to tell me I can't do that. And I can't just be like, well, that's my free speech. I love that company. So if you reframe it as marketing, all of a sudden, again, it's like the government doesn't need to protect your right to advertise. So it's weird.
I don't know the details of the NFL rules, but the fact that I see so many consistent phrases on the back of people's helmets, to me, leads me to believe that there's like
those are
list,
approved.
Of approved things that you can put on the back of your helmet.
Yeah, right. But what I'm saying is, if I go outside of that list, it's no longer the government's job to be like, well, he's doing free speech. They're like, he's marketing. Like, this is a different thing.
I guess because we culturally or society have decided when there's this is actually making a little bit more sense in my head. When there's an organization, you have the right to set up the organization to follow rules your way. And why it's okay to have that organization set up and those rules those way is because it's a choice to participate in that organization.
That's important.
So like Colin Kaepernick can walk away from the NFL. Anybody could walk away from the NFL. And why that's such a sticking point, and why I think that's actually a huge point in the courts, is a decision of like, what markets do you voluntarily participate in or not, which is why the Affordable Care Act, there was so much discussion about the individual mandate of you have to buy health care, because it's like, I can't walk away from this decision. And that's why that was a huge sticking point in that case. There's a voluntary participation element here, I think.
That is really interesting. It's funny how then that can be applied different ways too, because, for example, we all agree a company firing you for your gender is wrong because I didn't choose my gender necessarily, although with trans that gets a little sticky. But anyways, but then like you are choosing to fly on an airplane where people might be smoking.
That's true.
So it gets a little weird where sometimes we agree and sometimes we don't.
You could take a bus.
You could take a different form of transportation. Yeah.
Well, okay. And I guess now, again, these are cultural decisions that we say there are not accurate substitutes to, right? Almost of like, there's not a very good accurate substitute of a plane.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. You can drive, but like that's not, if you're trying to get somewhere for a time ratio, we accept as a culture like that is,
There's no other league you can play football in.
That's not true. There's the USFL.
Well,
I get your point.
Yeah. the XFL. It is just so as we're getting into like government's job of protecting rights, this is a moving target, clearly.
So, hence it's a snapshot that is a couple, handful of years behind where people actually think.
Yeah.
What's crazy too is like, okay, why America gets so complicated is you've got this federal level, right, that says these are rules that across our whole land apply. And then you've got, anything not, 10th Amendment says anything not handed or discreetly said by the federal government will be left up to the states.
Yep.
So then you have these instances where like this one state will go out and do something, and as a reaction to that, a state will go out and do the opposite.
Yeah.
I have a silly example of that where California made a rule that you can't gender toy aisles, and then Texas turned around and was like, you can't make any rules about gendering toy, like it's going to be completely neutral. And so you've got these weird, like, these rules, these rights that are different in different states. And you can look at that in a multitude of ways. It's complex for when you cross the country and I can have marijuana in this state. So do I. I think it's a good thing for two reasons. One, you let the people that are most local decide what is going to be for their rules in their state. And I love the quote, America is just 50 laboratories of democracy. We're running a bunch of different experiments and we're seeing what works. I mean, we're watching how legalization of marijuana plays out in Colorado and Washington as the first two states, and then other states are adopting that. Yep. You're watching that on the gambling front. We're seeing how things, map back and forth. What I am worried about, Alex, though, is now people are starting to move to where politically they align. And we're moving our echo chambers from the internet space to actual, like, your neighborhoods and your pieces like that. So people are going to line, blue people are going to migrate to blue states, red people are going to migrate to red states. And that, as comforting as that is for those people, I think that's problematic for stitching a cohesive union together.
I haven't decided if that's a problem or not.
I'm worried about it.
Yeah, because it's perfectly fine to seek others that think like you, but it could lead to some problems. I agree with that.
It's just another layer of the echo chamber, I think.
Yeah. But if everybody, which this is not true, but if everybody in your state sort of agrees, that's not necessarily an issue.
Yeah.
But the problem,
we're going to have the problem
is like that, but
right. Hypothetically, if we get to that though, now we have a problem about where we want to push federal money.
True. It's almost like now you're forcing the federal government to decide which state's more correct. Although maybe not. I don't know.
Well, and that's where I think the federal government, what's the role of the federal government?
We're back to the question. Yeah. Or do they go, each state can do whatever they want. So that's fine.
I look at it as the federal government says there's this very high level important crucial block of rights that we want to secure across all 50 states.
But those are moving targets though, too.
They are. But I think that as we identify them, we move them up to the federal level and vote as a whole country to say, we believe that these things should be.
Pin that one up on the board.
Same-sex marriage, access to birth control, federal, right? Those are federal
Yeah, true.
things. So
which is why I like the idea of each state running an experiment. I would love for a state to try universal health care. I think if anyone it'd be California, but I would love to see it. Try it.
Everyone was looking at California, but they ended up voting no because it was too expensive.
But I would love for someone to try it. But then, if we go, you know what, that looks pretty good, and that one should probably apply to everybody. We kind of pin it on the federal board. Yeah,
I would love to see a state practice UBI. Universal basic income.
I'd love to see how
that experiment goes. Yeah. I know some people will raise their eyebrows at this, and I have my own questions, but it's a thought of an experiment going out there of practicing legal and safe drug use, especially for addiction programs, of administering heroin in clinics. To get people off of addictive substances or opioids, right? I mean, just as a whole.
Yeah, I'd love to see that stuff get tried. And then we can determine if we should put it on the federal board or not. Or some things you go, well, we can't really decide, so just it stays with the states.
Yeah. Put it on the board. You walk into Washington, you go, write that one down on the board.
Just like a tack board of notes tacked all over it. These are our rights. One right I do want to talk about here. So in the last podcast, you brought up abortion.
I did.
And I want to reframe that right a little bit and talk about it. What if we changed and made this an amendment that you have a right to body autonomy? And opened it up, and so that would make abortion fully legal, but it would also make anti-vaccination fully legal.
You know, it's dark and morbid. My first thought was body autonomy. Is it legal to kill yourself?
I mean, it's not like they could put you in jail. Yeah, I think it would be. Well, I mean, what are they going to charge you with? Like attempted homicide?
Murder of self. Yeah,
that one might sort of also capture some trans rights too, which I think is not a bad thing.
True.
If you have the right to body autonomy, but it's just reframing, because right now abortion is federally protected on what I will call a somewhat shaky route.
Yeah, it's basically through precedent of a Supreme
it's
Court
actually,
rating, rather than it's not a right solidified in.
Correct. It was interpreted to be part of your right to privacy.
Yes.
Which I would call a stretch. But I think it's good that it's included. But so what I'm saying is maybe we solidify it and say you have a right to body autonomy. But now you're like appeasing two crowds that hate each other, and what happens?
Why? Because of the vaccines. And
so now the right can say we don't want to get vaccinated. Well, okay, you have a right to body autonomy. And the left can say we want to have abortions. Well, okay, you have a right to body autonomy.
Here's where I think you've got a problem there. Abortion is a very independent self-decision. Vaccination has impacts on a community because diseases can rip through a community of like.
Sure.
I think about why are vaccines required to go to school, right? Because then you are saving the children from risk of potential diseases.
Yeah. So
versus in abortion, there's no splash damage.
Yeah, that's true. I've thought through it a little bit. I think what would happen is you'd see public schools, all those vaccine requirements would go away because you can't have them. Private schools can have them. So that's fine. And now people have a choice. The other thing I think would happen, though, is like little things that would still be technically not the government would start to just require it. And so everyone would kind of end up vaccinated anyway.
I see. So like there's a choice of
like going to a football game.
Well, that's what I would say it is today. Are there any requirements of like if you wanted to homeschool your kid, you wouldn't have to vaccinate?
That's true.
If you want to join the military, you have to get vaccinated.
So, right, that would go away if the government can't impose that. So I don't know if we would end up that far away.
Hang on, though. No, I think the government could oppose that through a different lever, which is we only want to accept, train, and send off to war people who are not susceptible to modern common diseases of an area. Like that, it's a militarily disadvantageous to not have a vaccinated population.
That's true. We'll put an exception. Put an exception in the rule for that maybe, but we might end up in the same spot of where just other little things will start to require vaccines, but technically the government can't make you do it. There would never be a mandate like people are protesting in Canada. The government can't tell companies that you have to have a vaccine passport, but the company can, which is actually my stance this whole time.
Okay, let me break into this a little bit here too. So if you have bodily autonomy, what about like putting cocaine in your body? It's your body.
Well, yeah.
Right? But by doing that puts you it's the same. I'm gonna fall back into that same vaccine argument of like, now that will make you aggressive and put you at a risk to society.
Is there any other example of like something where you have a right to do something, but it's if you do it specifically, it's illegal?
Drink. You can't drink and drive. You can't drink and drive.
True. So cocaine could still be illegal.
Well, talk me through that. Are you saying sort of like, I thought you would have taken the argument it's okay to do cocaine, it's not okay to do cocaine and be aggressive.
Or it might be okay to do cocaine in your house, but not publicly. So that's
you're going full libertarian on this house.
You came up with the best example, though, where it is federally protected that we have access to alcohol.
That's true. It's an amendment.
That doesn't mean everyone. You can't drink and drive. There are rules. We have access to firearms, federally protected. But there are rules. So body autonomy, but there can still be rules. Like cocaine can still be illegal, technically, or maybe illegal outside your house or something. They can restrict it.
Sure. Guns are a good example there of like, yes, we have the Second Amendment, but if you are deemed clinically insane or mentally unstable, your right is revoked.
There's also private places,
very true,
even government places where you're not allowed to have one. You can't bring it in. but we can't say no. You can never have one ever. So I don't know. It's just a thought I had to reframe the argument to body autonomy is the right.
We're exploring the space. I mean, even abortions.
Yeah.
You don't have carte blanche access to abortions. You
can't get one the day before the baby's supposed to arrive.
Exactly.
Which we all kind of agree is that would be bad. The question is where's the line?
And the states are running through the courts right now trying to.
So it would be the same type of a thing. That would be an interesting proposal as an amendment. Would be the right to body autonomy. If I'm trans and I want to cut my dick off, that's my choice, which it is right now too. But it would become protected.
Who's stopping you right now, Al?
Well, Texas is doing some shitty things with trans rights right now, but
there's also now in terms of like the tweaks or clarifications of that. I would probably want to see certain clarifications around under 18-year-old decisions you can make.
I would
to
agree.
Your body.
Once you're over 18, you can make these decisions, or maybe like 16 with parental consent or something. Whatever. I don't know.
We
could figure that out. It'd be like marriage. The age to get married is different in every state.
Yeah,
could be like that. The age to cut your dick off is different in every state.
Huh. Yeah.
But your right to do so would be protected. I don't know. I kind of like it. I would actually very much support something like this. And if people are like, no, because you didn't think about this, I'd love to hear it.
Well,
so far, I would like this amendment.
I feel like it was cool to explore the space, but I've almost felt like we've come back to the same spot where we are now of like, yeah, you have these rights, but there's.
Well, but the difference was, first of all, the right to an abortion would be much sturdier ground than it is now.
Okay, that makes sense. Why that point does.
Some of these things where maybe we don't quite know, or it's very different. In some states, you can't do it at all. We would solidify some of these things, and then we can talk about maybe where the line is or what age is appropriate or something like that, which is fine. But I sort of like that as an amendment idea, so that the government can protect people's rights.
Well,
do their job.
Should it be a right that you have? The body autonomy argument makes sense from an abortion standpoint, but there's also there are actions to your consequences of sleeping with somebody, and does that give you just free reign to do something that is?
I can see you thinking through it, but I'm not sure I know where you're going with it.
Well, I don't exactly know where I'm going at either, and I.
Okay.
Yeah, the only thing I can say is when people start talking about abortion, I just shut up and listen, because I hear both sides of it, and
we don't need to determine our stances on it, but I agree.
I have personal feelings about. I have two separate pieces. I have personal feelings about it, and then I have what do I think the law should be. In the same way that I hate guns. I never want to own a gun. But I don't want. The way I jokingly talk about it is I say President Zach says common sense gun laws. King Zach says no more guns.
Oh, that's an interesting game to play.
Right? So, yeah, there are rights. I don't personally care about this owning this gun, but I don't think that I should be the one to say nope, there's no more. There are others who want this right, and now I think it should be tweaked in that we should have some step-ups of common sense gun laws, but I don't want to completely take it away, even though I'm not a fan of it.
Yeah, well, we've talked about this. We've talked about this before too, where abortion's not the real problem. The real problem's unwanted pregnancies.
Yeah. To which then we just move the argument though about what should we do about sexual education in America.
That's true.
Abstinence only, more access to sexual education and birth control.
All right, we've kind of found ourselves pretty far down and maybe a different trail here. So,
well, okay. I was chatting with one of my friends, and they were asking just how the podcast went, and I was like, the next episode we're going to cover what is the role of government. And he jokingly said, "What, part 1 of 15? Like, how are you going to tackle that question?"
Yeah.
In an hour.
We might do the same thing where we listen to this and go, you know what? I have a lot more that I want to say, which is fine.
Yeah.
Let's see. Looking through the list. Well, okay, so I have written here Disney World garbage example.
Yeah, I'm curious what that is.
Yeah, so the point here with government, I want your thoughts on which do you think is more effective and what should the role of government be? So let me start by asking you, do you know why Disney World parks are so clean? Notoriously, there's like no garbage anywhere.
Because they have... No, the real answer is I don't know.
Okay. It's because no matter where you are standing in Disney World, you can see a garbage can. But the point is, they're incentivizing you to throw their trash away. It's not that they made a rule that says you can't litter. I'm sure there is one. It's that they provided garbage cans everywhere, right? So the question then, if we take that to government, goes, should their role be to incentivize things? Like, for example, getting zero emissions, or let's just take it like moving to more electronic vehicles or electric vehicles. Should they make a law that says no more gas-powered vehicles after 2030? Or is it more effective and more their role, or you tell me, maybe they shouldn't be involved, to bolster companies like Tesla and advance and lower the cost of these things so that it just happens naturally?
So can I break this apart into two separate things? One is, sure, let's just talk kind of about current state, and then we can roll into what my own personal thoughts are. Because the government does do this. They subsidize oil and gas. They tax cigarettes and alcohol highly, right? The sin tax. So
that's true. So they're driving behavior a little bit.
Yep, they are incentivizing through monetary pieces. I mean, you could also, depending how you want to twist this argument, they make it illegal to have like monopolies. That, just as a quick aside, that's a pretty crazy thing when you think about it, of like the government will come in and break you up. Like, you as a business can do so good and lock things in so well that the government can just come in and be like, nope, we have a law that says you are too powerful, we're breaking you apart, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, but you have to look at that through the eyes of the consumer.
Totally, and that's why it's there, to protect the sort of consumer rights. But it's pretty wild that, like, if your business becomes too good, the government will just step in and be like, nope, you're now 4 companies.
That's true. I think it'd only really become a problem, though, if they start jacking up prices because there's no competition. Like, if you were to become a monopoly and keep prices low, for example, it might be less of a problem.
I think you'd still get broken up if you have too much market share, because then you're in a position to control prices.
Yeah.
It's a little preemptive.
So you're saying the government would do it preemptively, or would they wait to see it start happening?
I would think
I don't know the answer.
I would think they do it preemptively, because the reason I say that is because the government is looking at things like Google, right, and potentially breaking up. There's been inquiries about Google being too strong, and like, it's not like Google is price gouging anything, but there's too much control there, and they're in too much of a position to price gouge as well, I believe.
I guess
same with Facebook, right?
Does make sense.
The government has investigated whether Facebook has too much power, right, as a platform, and the answer so far has been no to both of those. But there's not a price gouging action happening.
That gets so crazy though, because like, if we just take Facebook as an example, what would you call them a monopoly of?
Well,
I get they probably should be looked at, or even Google.
Google,
what industry are they a monopoly of? It gets really weird.
Search engine would be the answer for Google.
Okay, so is there not Bing and DuckDuckGo and all these other competitors?
It comes down to market share, I would say, and how like usage and market power. That's my just personal take without deeply looking into it. Part of the reason Facebook is interesting, I think, is because for a while there were basically countries and areas where like Facebook just was the internet. Like when you
That's true, and that is bad.
Yeah.
Where it like came pre-installed on stuff and you
Exactly.
couldn't get rid of it. That is a problem.
And like this is where the Microsoft versus the United States cases came in of like whether or not the operating systems worked or whether or not the applications all worked, whether you had Internet Explorer or not, right? And now you there's like an influence game here too, along with price gouging, I would say.
Which these things too have been, I guess, not saying we're breaking you up, but like we're going to nudge you into a little bit maybe of a different direction than you as a company, I'm sure, would love to take. Like
Yeah.
Facebook. You probably want your stuff pre-installed on everything. And it's like, oh, we're not going to break you up, but you can't do that.
Yes.
Like, okay.
Protect the consumer in some ways. I mean,
Which is good.
It's always wild to me too of like, AT&T, T-Mobile, Sprint, Verizon, right? When was it T-Mobile and Sprint combined, right? Like that there was a long review of like whether or not there's still enough competition in the wireless carrier space.
Yeah, well, there was a couple. Remember Nextel, US Cellular? There used to be a lot, and now there's like 4.
Right. And it's,
Or Sirius XM is another kind of weird example too of 2 competitors that just became one company.
and to me, at first I was like, oh, hey, like Sprint and T-Mobile coming together, you now have like combined cellular net. Like it seems like there's all these benefits from a consumer, but you're not thinking about the piece behind of now how much control they have and how they can sway the market in that way. Okay.
So that's a good example too of us as a culture saying, you know what, government, we'd like you to step in here
Yes.
to protect our rights.
We set the rights of not being raked over the
I guess maybe that's not a right, but you're sort of just protecting the consumer from being screwed over.
Yes. Okay, so that was the commentary about the current state of like the government sort of stepping in, right? Now,
So they do this already was a little, if I could go back and sum up, which is true.
Yep.
And they nudge things kind of in the direction maybe that they want to go or what's best for the consumer.
right, so originally this was about like incentives and
Well, the real question is, do you ban something? Like gas cars are outlawed after 2030. Or is it more effective to go, we're going to invest in all these EV companies, and by 2030, no one's going to want a gas car anyway? And the difference is framing, because one feels like you're stopping me from doing whatever I want to do, which is, I mean, to sum it up, to make it super simple, right? I'm free. I should be able to choose what I want to do, blah, blah. I mean, there's problems with that statement, but whatever. And the government's saying no. Or is the government saying, we're going to make this choice
more
so much
difficult.
more appealing that you're just going to choose it for yourself anyway?
Yeah, make a choice more difficult or a choice more appealing.
Yeah. It just feels better to me going that route. It feels better to put garbage cans everywhere versus saying no littering.
You know, I've recently thought about this from the lens of, is there any country that has like state-run or organized gyms that are free memberships? Because is it cheaper to keep people healthy through gyms rather than paying a bunch in state health insurance?
That's an interesting. Well, that's why a lot of health insurance companies want you to go to the doctor every year.
Well, they
it's
want
in
you-
their best interest, and they'll pay for it.
Yep, preventative care is
Yeah.
preventative care is so much cheaper that a lot of it
That's
is
an
free.
interesting thought, though, is if the government got ahead of.
Can
like,
you imagine
fitness.
these just like massive gyms with a big like state logo on it?
Oh, that would be weird. But
Here's-
I mean, should there be more stuff like that? And maybe there should. If like, I mean, people might argue that
Is
the
that the
government
best
should-
use of taxpayer money?
yeah, is that the best use of money? But it'd be kind of cool. I mean, the government's the one that provides parks for the most part.
That's a little bit what I was thinking of, like all the great state trails and biking trails we have in
I
Minneapolis.
see the government being like, here's a trail you can run on, and you're like, well, can I have a treadmill? No, we don't do that. Just trails.
You gotta go outside.
You got to go outside.
Here's why I think that the more I've thought a little bit on this state-run gym program is the people who are likely going to go work out and care a lot about working out are going to pay for gym memberships or just go run and do it themselves. And the people who
True.
probably need working out the most potentially may not use it.
We're also going down a weird, as you get state-run things, you're going down a weird, like, socialistic type of a thing where all of a sudden the government's just in charge of providing all these things that it thinks is best for you.
Now we're back to the critical question, what is the role of government? Is it the bare minimum, I just build roads, I just build schools, I just pay for policing and ambulatory? Or we have decided there are socialistic elements to the
You just mentioned some. Police, fire, school.
Yeah, yep. And but like even like a step beyond that, I would say of like food stamps, unemployment. Like these programs are safety net style programs. Yeah. And we've decided those
we are
acceptable.
playing the role of an insurance company a little bit because we're sort of deciding that if they weren't there, it'd be worse and would actually cost us more money.
Yeah.
Due to higher crime or things like that. Versus going, well, we'll just give the people some money for food, and that actually is cheaper in the long run. It'd be interesting to see that mathematical equation played out on other stuff, like a gym.
Mm-hmm. I think if I could sum this up into a nice observation over the last, 50 years, right? I've had some conversations with people, and they've had some cool analogies where they've talked about how America used to be a front porch society, and we've now moved to a backyard society. You used to hang out on your front porch. You used to care about your community. You used to talk. There was a lot of this community piece. And now it's about, I want my backyard. I want my fence up. I want just my thing.
Privacy.
We've moved from this community-driven caring sort of like more, I hate to say sort of family value, but like that kind of element to America to an individualism in America. And it's about my rights, and it's an individual focused thing. And there are
I think a lot of that is the product of the internet and people moving all over to do different types of work and all that kind of stuff.
It's all just been sort of a product of the times. But I think as we've moved into this individualism mindset, people, since we don't have the family or community things that used to offer, or church, we could even bring religion to this, because those things aren't there for a safety net, more and more people are looking at the government to step in and offer those things in an individualistic approach society.
That's a good observation. I've never heard it framed like that, a front porch society to a backyard society, but it actually does make sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's good or bad.
Me neither. I don't. There's pros and cons to both. I do think we've lost senses of community that we should try and get back in America, and part of that is tribe. The whole tribalistic political society where like.
But okay, so actually this is perfect in the same example.
Yeah.
Should the government sort of create their own things, which is what you're saying, people are sort of looking to the government, or should the government just fund other good community programs in all these different places?
That's a great question. In economics, we call this the make or buy problem. Should you make something, or should you buy it and contract it out? And the really short, I could talk about this I took a whole class on this. It was phenomenal in economics. And if I distill it down to the shortest version, it depends on how hard it is to police, how hard it is to monitor the contract. Great example being, come pick up my trash. Super easy to contract out. That's a buy. Because I can write a contract that says you will pick up trash these days of the week. These are the colored trash cans you will pick up. Really easy to monitor. I can go drive out and see, did you pick up trash or not? I can penalize you by the contract. Something that's way more complicated to police and monitor the contract on, something like ambulatory service centers. Because can you imagine a private company where you get a phone call and you'll be like, hey, I've been stabbed in the leg. And they'll be like, okay, what did you get stabbed with? And you're like, a screwdriver. And they'll be like, okay, in our contract, that's a non-lethal weapon, so we'll be there in 30 minutes. But if it was a knife, we'd be there in 12, right? And so like really hard to write and monitor a good contract. So the government just says, we're not going to outsource that. We're going to do that in-house.
Couldn't you just write a contract that says you have to go regardless?
Okay, but that gets complicated to police.
I see what you're saying.
Then that's difficult, I would say, from a privatization standpoint of can you make a model that you can still make money on, because that's the whole point of the business company that's going to accept that contract, that says, all right, I'm going to go to every call in 12 minutes. No way. Like,
but you don't have to make money if the government's paying you.
Sure you do. That's the whole point of why as a private company would you exist to.
Yeah, so you no longer are forced to be profitable if the government's just going to pay for it all. Which then I guess
no, you still have to
no
be
longer a private company.
You still have to be profitable in the fact that you're just saying basically you want to make it a ton. You're going to put the contract super high. As a private company, of course, if you're not profitable, then what's the point of being the private company?
Well, what I'm saying is, okay, so if we go make or buy, the government's deciding if they want to create
in-house
a gym service.
Yeah.
In-house, right? USA gyms or whatever. Or do I go, well, I'll make a gym, and as long as you pay me $1 million a year, I'll run a gym. I don't even care if I'm making money from my members. The government's paying me.
Well, you care if you're making money because if it costs you $500,000, you think you can run the gym for $500,000, you can pocket the other $500,000. But if you think it's going to take you $1.5 million to run the gym and you're only getting $1 million from the government, you're not going to take that contract.
So we're saying the same thing. I'm not including the government fund as
that's your revenue.
Profitable.
Well,
that's kind of what I'm saying.
And
I don't care if I'm making money from my members.
Okay.
I should rephrase
I'm
it.
zooming out and I'm saying,
losing money on the members, but I don't care because the government's really the one paying for it.
But then you're still profitable.
Yeah, we're saying the same thing,
yeah.
just using different terms.
So it becomes like, what are good things how hard is the contract to review, uphold, and maintain, basically? And there's interesting ones of like the best hot topic example is prisons, because there's for-profit prisons. However, that model is pretty messed up because then usually you
want
get paid
people in prison.
Exactly, you get paid per head, and so those companies want people in prison. And there's been studies done of like for-profit versus just government-run prisons, and the for-profit prisons have higher infraction write-ups, which keep people in prison longer because they get paid more. And so it's like, whoa, your incentives are in wrong directions.
Well, that should be the determining factor, though, in this whole conversation on make or buy. And if it comes down to, are you incented? So prison's a good example, right? Because you're incentivized to keep people in prison, which we as a culture would go, that's kind of messed up. Mm-hmm. So that would become a make.
Yeah,
because
I think what you're saying a little bit indirectly is, how's the contract going to look between the private company and the government?
Yeah, and is it in the best interest of people? In this case, like, I was going to say consumer, which is a little bit weird because you at the prison are sort of like, you're consuming the services of the prison.
Yeah, I saw that commercial for that prison over there. I was
so the government should, yeah, take me to that one. That one looks nice. But so that's where the government should step in and say, hey, we need to protect the consumer, which in this case is like the inmate. They're consuming the prison services, if you really boil it down.
That's true. And
say we need to protect them and get them out of this situation where you're keeping them there for profit. I like the frame. Obviously, we haven't answered any questions, but we're sort of building frames to look at things.
Yeah.
And I kind of like it.
What's an interesting...
it's like rape whistles.
Wait, back up. Tell me more about that one before I...
No, it's like Bo Burnham's rape whistles joke.
Oh,
if you are the inventor of rape whistles, you want as much rape out there as possible.
If that's what your goal is to make a bunch of money.
That's how you can incent it. Okay, great. So let's make that one then, because we actually don't want that to be the goal.
That's true.
Not my joke. It's Bo Burnham.
What's interesting is in some contracts, there's been like governments ways that you can force private companies to play ball, basically, is you write a contract that has stupid high penalty rates. Like a good example is if you've got a road clearing service, right?
Okay.
Because there's these weird economic scenarios you can get into where the private company will be like, oh, we get fined $200 a day if I leave a bunch of broken glass on the road. Well, it cost me $10,000. I'm making these up. $10,000 just to give the example. $10,000 to hire this very specific tow truck and cleaning crew. But if I wait and I can do with them, or they're in high demand right now, I'll just eat the penalty for 5 days, let the glass sit on the road, then actually call them out there when they're cheaper with this service. The government hates that.
It's more cost effective to just leave it there for a few days.
Exactly. Yeah. The government hates that now because of this service, right? There's glass on the road for 5 days. So there's been like where you write like if there is still glass on the road after 24 hours of reporting it, it's like a $10 million fine, right? So you have to swing it in a way that says, I am going to just crack your skull with this contract if you know.
Interesting.
But now, however, the private company says, ooh, do I want to sign this where I'm going to be held liable for $10 million if I can't get there in 24 hours?
Yep.
Welcome to contracting theory.
It's got to be an agreed upon, which, by the way, as we're talking about this, I'm thinking we've talked a lot. We've built some frames to look at stuff that I haven't really thought about before, which I like. We haven't answered any of these questions. But by the way, when people are like, oh, nothing ever gets done, this is why. Like, we're sitting here going, yeah, this is so complicated.
Yeah. What is the role of government is, I think, one of the coolest questions, because I also think how you answer this question slowly starts pushing you in a camp of left or right.
Well, that's true. You can get a better guess, maybe. Which, I would consider myself more libertarian, but also
okay. So it pushes you in a direction. We're going to say libertarian is up. You get pushed up in that direction.
But some libertarians would say there shouldn't be any of these services, and I disagree.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's libertarians who say there shouldn't be driver's licenses.
Well, exactly. So that's ridiculous. So I don't agree with that. Which again, even just trying to figure out where you are on this big dot plot is not easy.
Correct.
And honestly, shouldn't even really matter. This whole right versus left dichotomy is also like a little bit of a lie.
Tell me more.
Well,
you're sounding very Andrew Yang right now.
People just want to, forward. People just want to pick a team, but it's not really a good idea to go, oh, you voted for Biden, I hate you now. It's like, well, you haven't learned anything about me. Like, how about we look at this differently to where there's no longer two choices. Let's look at like 100-point dot plot and see where we are, and we might not be that far apart, but that's harder to do. It's more complicated.
I think the reason that one of many reasons that political parties are so alive and well and almost are even growing in this tribalism is because as a consumer, we're going to stick at that, sort of a voter, it's cheap, easy to just say, these are my views. I'm not going to look into them. I'm just going to vote blue because they're roughly what I think. Personally, this is me getting like a little bit aggressive here, but I think it's intellectually lazy to not look at the nuances and just say, I'm going to vote for this person because there's an R next to their name.
Totally agree with that. But and we've talked about this before too, where I might agree with you on 9 things out of 10, but that last one is what means the most to me, and so I put my vote
on the other side.
To that side.
Yeah.
So even though maybe I voted blue and you voted red, we agree on 9 things out of 10, but that last one was really what's most important to me for whatever reason. We shouldn't hate each other. Like, we actually mostly agree.
Yeah.
And it becomes more complicated. The whole team game there should fall apart, but it doesn't, and that's what I don't like.
And there are some people who just, they're like, hey, this is what the Republican or Democratic Party stands for, and I like 80% of it, so that's why I'm voting that way, which is
that's fine.
Totally makes sense. I also, in defense of the people who do just vote R or D, as much as I don't like it, the brain is literally built to find patterns and box things up into neat, very like cut squares. And
find tribes. And
that's true. It's evolutionarily built into us to find these sort of communities and be liked and sort of
well, and that's one thing
stitched into it.
You just said community, which made me think it's almost a problem where we're losing these other communities and your political party is becoming one, and that I do not like that.
Same. I think we've talked in the past, Al, about how politics now feels less about solving problems and more about cheerleading.
Yeah, it's become a sport.
Yeah.
And you cheer your team on, which is not great because it should be about solving problems. People forget that the government works for us, the people, and so if we don't like it,
we change it.
We can stand up and change it. Yeah, and I'm not saying like revolt, but I'm saying you don't have to be like, yeah, we're winning or oh no, we're losing. It's like, well, you shouldn't even be thinking about it like that. You should just say, what should we be changing? What should we do? What ideas do they have? Are there good ones in there? let's talk about the good ones. Let's throw out the bad ones, and it just becomes a totally different conversation.
And I would say, just to like build a layer onto that, what I really like is sort of like, I don't care if it's a right or left idea. Give me the idea, and then give me the thinking underneath it.
Yeah.
Like basically, here's your claim. Okay, why do you think that's a good claim? What is your evidence? Show me.
Show your work.
Yeah. Show me the data that is why you think this is a problem, and how your solution is going to address that. And show your work is a great way to put it. And honestly, you can cut through a lot of just swirl or people yelling at each other. I think if you're like at a cocktail party or you're with people and you're just like, both parties suck. Like that's kind of like
take anyway. Yeah,
cuts through.
They're both bad.
A lot of the like, we're winning, we're losing, is just be like, yeah, they both suck. They're both self-interested in putting their people up there.
Yeah, totally. We could keep talking forever. So maybe any final thoughts for here? I'm sure we might do the same thing where we go back and listen and write more things down and just keep calling back the previous episode. But
let me just plant a little seed here. If we open this up, we may go in a lot of different directions. But one thought I have in this whole space that we talked about, like what is the role of government, is when we start leaning over into like what is the role of representation in government, and the idea of a political representative, a politician who like I kind of go back and forth internally of like, do you want somebody who has these really strong values and sticks to those values like when they get elected in, or do you want somebody that sways sort of in populism of like the way that the people are swaying, because they're a representation of the people?
That's a good question.
So this is one that I get turned around on a lot of like, do I want somebody that's just voting with the way that the people shout, or do I want somebody who, I mean, I obviously want somebody who's more thought out in terms of like, these are the impacts.
Sure.
But I don't know if you want somebody that just votes 100% party lines because that's who they sort of got voted into, or if they really are like, my constituents are swinging, I should swing with them. It's a question for us to unpack potentially another time, unless you have some real.
Well, I was going to say, just off the bat, I would lean towards more populism, because they're representing a community and they should be trying to do what the community wants. I get your point though of like, well, I voted them in because I liked their ideas over someone else, but that's not truly then a government for the people. It kind of is, but I think it'd be better for them to almost check back in with the community every once in a while and go, what do we want? Do you like what I'm doing? And if the community goes, actually, we don't like your stance on X, they should change their stance on X.
Should they change their stance on X, or like, is that the time when you vote somebody new in and you don't expect these people to be like just pendulum swinging on there?
Well, hopefully they're not drastically swinging, because any drastic swing would be a new person. But little things here and there, I almost would prefer them to check back in and go, you know what? I talked to my community. I thought we would have wanted this, but it turns out they want that.
Yeah.
I think that's good. But that's just my initial reaction. I might reflect on that a little bit. But
yeah, reflect on that, and reflect on the idea of peer democracy with new internet blockchain, what your thoughts are on just putting everything up to the vote for the people.
Should everything be a referendum?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. But okay, so we're already setting up the next episode, but yeah, let's think about those things. I have another topic too that I'm going to keep maybe secret, and we'll talk about in the same vein, but we'll talk about that next episode too. Before we sign off though, I have a quick word game for you.
All right, I'm interested. I don't know what this is.
So you're going to fill in 2 blanks, and then there are clues to help you to figure it out, okay?
So this is not like a personal pick, like I'm trying to solve a riddle?
Yeah.
Okay.
The riddle is this, Zach. This episode was a blank blank. Clue number 1. What does the F stand for in ETF in regards to like stock trading?
Fund?
That is correct. Clue number 2. What would you, or maybe someone even younger, say after finishing your meal at the dinner table? I'm
full?
Blank. Not full. Another word, you'd go, I'm this, and get up and leave.
Done.
Correct. Now, to fill in the 2 blanks, can you remove the D's from the 2 words that you just discovered?
Remove the D's. I believe it would be, this is a fun one.
Hey, that's correct. This is a fun one. Thanks for playing, and thanks everyone for listening. Have a good night.